Democrat, Councillor for Dorn-Totley.
Councillor Sue Alston, Deputy Chair of this committee, Liberal Democrat Councillor for Forward.
Thank you, and if I can now ask the officers to introduce themselves. Shall we start here?
David Hollis, General Counsel.
We'll now move on to apologies for absence, please, Jason.
No apologies received, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Item 3 is exclusion of the public and press. We have no items where we will exclude the non-existent press or public at the moment. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask if any of the members would like to declare an interest in any item? No. Item 5 is minutes of the previous meeting. Are members happy to approve those minutes subject to typographical error that was in point 7.5? Everyone happy to approve? Thank you. Item 6 was public questions and petitions. We did receive some questions after the deadline, and I propose that we're happy to take the questions that relate to a particular item on the agenda, which is the next item, so I propose we take them there. And now we will move on to that item 7, which is the interim report of the review of the Council's approach to public questions. Laurie, if you would like to give the report first, and then we'll bring the public questions that were asked into the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. What I propose is that I'm not going to go through the entire slide packet itself. It's published, it's online, it's available for all members of the public and staff and members as well. What I'll do is I'll give a brief summary of the work we've done to date. The idea here is to just give you a flavour of what citizens have told us through the survey work we've done on public questions and petitions. I'll pull out some of the key headlines, obviously open it up to conversation and questions after that, and suggest some next steps about what we need to do as a committee and to take the information and the evidence that people have given us from their experience of using the public questions and petitions approach. So after the last committee meeting, what we did was, as we agreed, we launched 2 pieces of survey work. One was about public questions in Sheffield City Council, the other one was about petitions. As part of that, we contacted people who'd asked a public question in the last 12 months, but we also used some of our social media channels and our direct mail outlets. So we, as you know, the council sends out newsletters on a weekly basis and flagged to people, trying to get people's interest in whether they'd asked public questions and what their experience had been, but also if they hadn't. One of the steers from members last committee was that we're genuinely interested in what people think about the whole system and what their perception of it is, even if they hadn't asked the question at any point. And the second piece of work we did a couple of weeks back on the 14th of September, we ran a public workshop. It was in the town hall, but in a different space to this, where we got members of the public who put themselves forward to come and get involved in the conversation about their experience of using public questions. We had a mix of people, predominantly people who'd asked questions, but 3 or 4 people who hadn't as well. And so therefore we had a number of table conversations chaired by members in this room. And again, thank you to members for leading some of those conversations. To listen to people's experiences, it was kind of a more open and listening exercise, and not really trying to develop solutions, but really just understanding what people had experienced in their time working with us or coming to ask questions. So very briefly, rather than going through every slide, thinking about the process, what people told us really, there were 3 key points from this. One, there's quite a big awareness problem. The visibility and understanding of that if you've never asked a public question, even knowing it exists and that is a genuine route available to you is a significant challenge, I think, for a lot of people. There's a significant number of people who didn't know that was an option, and maybe that's okay, but people need to know that what it could be used for if they ever need to use it or they ever want to use it. So there's a job for us, and that's communication, it's community involvement, it's talking to our citizens about what that route could be used for their sort of engagement in local democracy. So we need to improve visibility, we need to improve local knowledge about what that's for. Second key point really was it's quite complex to navigate the system. the ways in and how you ask a question, what happens to it, is quite challenging for people who've never asked a question, so they don't understand how it works. But then also, if you ask a question, people find it quite unwieldy, they find it complicated. They said that the interplay between the various committee deadlines, so paper deadlines, meeting deadlines, and the deadlines around when you can submit questions is quite confusing, and therefore, and that potentially has an interplay with the quality of the answer they think they get on the back of it, whether if it's something that's very close to the deadline, it maybe gives officers and members less time to come up with a really thought through answer. So there's something we need to get into in that. And then the third bit was really about people feeling that they're not always heard. So if they submit a question, a lot of people feel like that it should be read out and should be discussed in the meeting, even if they aren't there. There are probably some equality barriers in this as well. So you could certainly see scenarios where it may be a physical barrier to get into that meeting to ask that question. And therefore, if we don't take it or don't air it in that meeting, it feels like their voice isn't being heard. And that barrier might have been due to caring commitments. It could be due to a physical disability. It could be due to actually just coming into a room like this and feeling confident to present a question like that is quite a challenge. So we have to be quite cognizant of what that means in terms of how we make this a more accessible space for people to come out and talk to elected members. So that's really about the process. There's definitely something about the system, there's something about the visibility, and there's something about how and when we sort of create space to people to hear those questions. Just moving on to the responses, I think there's quite a genuine feeling that the experience and the quality of response people receive, there's a strong message that people feel it's mixed and it needs to improve. So people have said their experience is quite inconsistent and often unsatisfactory. In lots of cases, people said they didn't get a response at all, and it felt like there wasn't enough time in the meetings to genuinely get into the issue they're raising. So it's almost like it's a response rather than an actual conversation or understanding an issue. Now, that could be everything down to the duration of meetings and how much time we can allocate within the proportion of a committee meeting or a council meeting to public questions. So the answers might not be in public questions, through the extending council meetings, they might be finding different solutions, but we need to come to that when we get to it. There's something about, I think this connects with the navigation of the system as well, and understanding where questions go and where's the best place to ask a public question to get the sort of answer you want. There's something about the end-to-end transparency. In other places, you can probably call this the customer journey of a question, but it's almost like being clear to citizens where, when they ask a question, what happens to it next? And at any point in that process, there's something about being really open and transparent about understanding where it's got to, what's going to happen to it, what the response was, so that any citizen could see what that response looked like, but also that where it was going to go next and what action was going to happen as a result. And it might be that the answer is the action that was needed, but it might be that a follow-up response is going to need to happen, or a written response is going to need to happen. So there's something about that journey of a citizen's question through the system, and where any member of the public or any member of staff or any member of the council could look and see where that question's got to. So we could certainly provide a clearer framework to advise the best place a question could be asked, but also how that journey operates through our democratic system. And then just finally, one last point, there's a sort of a shared commitment to good standards in here and good practice and good behaviours, and I think that's on everybody really, including officers and citizens and members. People said through the survey that sometimes they felt that members and officers, and obviously there were no names mentioned, and we suspect, and people implied citizens too, certainly at the workshop, felt that everybody had to treat the process with respect and respect to the various actors within it, so that sometimes the interactions people felt were quite negative and abrupt. So there could be an opportunity of co-designing some sort of a compact of how we address that sort of challenge with officers, members and citizens. But again, I don't want to jump to solutions here. So that's quite a clear message. The only slide I'm going to refer to is the last one on the back of the pack, which is really the next step. So obviously, we're going to have a little discussion about it now and really open and interested to hear member feedback on some of the work, and particularly if members were at the workshop as well, your perspective on some of the conversations you had on tables, which I thought were really good. So happy to hear, that'd be really useful to hear. We need to carry on digging deeper into the evaluation of the data because there's quite a lot of rich content in there and lots of written content, plus all the workshop feedback. There is something about taking the insights from a citizen engagement session, but also one that stakeholders, members of the public have organised separately to this, which connects to a public question we've had today. Ruth Hubbard, who's and a network of people have had a similar workshop on public questions and have written writing a draft report for us to contribute to this conversation, which I think is really valuable. We'll take all that on board. We've only just received a draft of that this morning. And I know Ruth is going to work on adding content to that. So when we get the final content of that, we can add this to the rich picture that we're developing here about how the system works and how we find solutions. And we've also had content because we've had this conversation in this setting, and obviously through our networks internally, we've had intelligence and insight from staff, and that's both from people who have to manage the public question system, but also people who have to come up with answers really. And provide good answers to members of the public. And we should take that on board as well, because this is a collective effort, really. It's something we have to all work towards, including the citizens that are asking questions as well. So we need to take that on board as we develop solutions. So just in terms of next steps, what I'm proposing, and it's in the overview paper that comes with the slides, is to the task and finish group of members from this committee, we're going to try and meet again before the end of October so we can discuss all the findings, including Ruth's report. Then we need to probably run another workshop really, looking at the overall picture we've got, the evidence, and the key challenges, and trying to come up with a collective set of solutions, which is co-designed really with citizens and officers and members. And that probably needs to be bounded by some of the challenges within capacity, and there will be some consequences for choices we make, and we need to probably be pretty open and honest about that as we go through it. And we'll test those solutions with the citizens, and then probably bring a draft report to finalise this piece of work in the November committee meeting, which is towards the end of November, I think. And that's where I want to stop, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Before I bring members in, Laurie did just refer there to the citizen-led group that had a session last weekend, and Ruth Hubbard's questions related to that, so I'll just go through those here. She asked if the Appointing Task and Finish Group and Governance Committee would carefully consider the issues and findings in the Sheffield Oversight and Scrutiny Interim paper for the purposes of the current Council review of public questions and petitions. I can give a straightforward yes to that question. We will certainly include it, and thank you to those citizens who contributed to this and have sent the feedback. The second question was to ask if we would include it in full in the minutes of this meeting. As Laurie said, the version we have at the moment is draft, and Ruth has asked that we don't publish that version, but we'd be very happy to publish the minutes, the notes from that session when they are finalised. And the final question was to report back at the appropriate time on how the paper has had any influence or not in the process, and for thinking in the ongoing review, and in any proposals for improvements the committee might consider coming out of its review. I'm also happy to give it a yes to that, and I hope that we would be able to feed that back when we consider this report at the next Governance Committee meeting, when we've hopefully got through the rest of the work. Joe.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for this. I suppose my question is, do we have a sense of why people are asking public questions? And let me elaborate on that a little bit. Clearly, if you have an issue with the council, there's a number of avenues you can go down. You can contact your local councillor, you can contact the service directly, you can put in a freedom of information request. In some cases, you might be able to go to the local government ombudsman directly. Depending on what the nature of the issue is, the nature of the reason for the question. So, and I think we've talked before about the importance of being able to steer people to the right place, and it's not just which committee, but which avenue is the best for the kind of issue that somebody has. Now, clearly, the key features of public questions are that you get to ask a question on the record, and if you don't get an answer, or if the answer is inadequate, then that, in a sense, is also on the record, isn't it? So if that's what you know, if that's important in your case, which it often is, then clearly a public question is a good mechanism for you as a member of the public to use. Yeah, I mean, so I suppose my question is, do we have a sense, therefore, how this fits in to all the avenues that members of the public have, and do we have a sense of whether the public understand all their options and have, you know, are they able to make a good choice of which option to use? Because that seems to me that possibly we have a lot of public questions we shouldn't, and perhaps we're missing some public questions we should have.
I think we, from the survey work and from the workshop we had as well, I think we were getting a pretty clear sense of this. There are some questions which there's a sort of set of questions which are about the sort of political platform, really, I think, which is just reality. It's part of the democratic process, people wanting to raise significant issues about democracy in Sheffield, which you see play out at full council and at Strategy and Resources Committee and etc. There are definitely some questions which are almost like escalated issues, like complaints, which come up at definitely full council, but also at specific policy committees as well. I think from the conversations we had at the workshop, I'm just scouting around the data at the minute, so I'm trying to pull out some answers, but it was quite fascinating where I think people are, I don't think people have a very clear sense of where is the best place to go and ask a question and where's the best place to get an answer. So on the table, Councillor Alston and myself were on. There was a lady sat next to me who sort of said, my first port of call would always be my LAC, because most of the time, the things that I'm interested in really pertain to my local area, but then I'm never quite sure when I'd need to go to the specific policy committee, for example. So if it's a waste and street scene issue, if she went to her LAC first, at what point does she feel that's going to get resolved, or does she feel that she needs to escalate that, or does she forget the LAC itself and go straight to the waste and street scene committee? And I think whilst where people ask for our advice, so through democratic services, we'll help them navigate to the right place for the type of question it is, it's still down to the citizen to sort of be self-directed about where they want to take it. So there's something about having a much clearer navigation on the website and in the advice we give to help people find the right source for that question. Sometimes people want to take it to full council because it's the biggest setting.
Thank you. If I could just respond on one aspect of that. I mean, you've raised the LACs, which I didn't refer to, but I think it's a really good point. And I do think it's a problem we've created for ourselves in this council, in that we have not been clear what the LACs are for, and we have directed a lot of people to ask questions at the LACs, which the LACs are not really well placed to answer. And so, you know, the questions going to the LACs, and officers are going away and writing answers, which are then provided by members in the LAC, who are not members responsible for the area in question. So I think your example, I'm quite happy for people to come direct to Waste and Street Scene if they have a question that's under our area of responsibility, even though it pertains to their local area, because why not? Why would you go one step removed from that when you could go straight to the committee responsible? Yeah, in terms of giving people guidance on what all their options are and where to go, I think we need to kind of rid ourselves of a belief about the LACs which we have held, which hasn't been correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you, and thanks for that, Laurie. I think I'm going to make comments rather than questions as such, but just drawing out some of the points that have been raised that came out of that workshop. The first one of those is that people do find it intimidating, and I think one of the things that we could actually do really quickly is to make it possible for people to do questions in a different way, or have them read out for them, for example, things like that. And I think that's something we should look at very quickly, because I think it would be a fairly quick win. The main thing I want to talk about, though, actually relates to Joe's question, which is that what came out of our discussion, I think, was that a lot of people just would not know where to go, so they plump for what they think is right, but that may then result in them, A, not getting what they want, and B, doesn't make for a smooth process after they've asked the question, if you see what I mean. So, but that doesn't just apply to asking questions at policy committees and council. I think there's a bigger piece of work that needs doing once we've done this about contacting the council and making access so that we have in one place the information. So if you want a pothole fixed, contact this. You can contact your councillor by this, link to the councillors. And also, where do people live? So many people don't know which ward they're in, so having to look for their councillor by their ward is not that easy. And then, you know, if you want to raise an issue about this, you can choose this or this. And just make it really, really easy for people to navigate. And I think it's not a new problem. I think we've probably all been aware of this for a long time. But I think this is a good opportunity to actually try and instigate some improvements for the general public to access, not just about questions, but also about raising issues, to highlight issues, if you like, rather than just ask a question. And my other bit is really just to agree with Laurie that we do need to look at making sure people understand a pathway for the answer. It's really difficult because questions come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're very, very specific and we can give them a yes-no type answer. Other times they're things that could be fed into discussion later on. But I think we need to have a clear protocol or pathway so that people can understand where they're going. So actually I think this is actually going to be an important bit of work, and I hope we can do it as quickly as possible because we have got a lot of other things to do.
Thanks, Sue. Agreed. There wasn't a question there, so I'll move on to the next person, which was Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. Like Sue, I think I just have various comments. The question about how do people ask questions and why don't more people come, and would you sort of get on a bus in Crystal Peaks to come all the way here to ask a question that you might not be sure that you were doing the right thing anyway, or indeed if you're at work you're going to get time off to come and do the same thing. So something I think we need to perhaps consider is about remote access questions, but we have to be clear about why that happens. The other thing about questions is that I know last year I would often say, can you try and keep your question brief? And yet people want to be able to give you the story of why they're asking that question so that you understand why the question is being asked. And I think perhaps we do need to talk to people beforehand and say, I can see why you want to give all this information. What can we do to make it succinct without removing what you want to say, but also not giving you 10 minutes of introduction before your question, because quite often you've lost the person by the time you get to your question. And then the types of questions, I think, is something that Joe actually said, was about the difference between people who come to ask specific questions about big policy issues, whether it's how far we've gone with the Lowcock report or other things, versus our very favourite Val, who comes because she knows that if she says, and you need to sort out my carpet, that's what will grab our attention and we'll therefore do it. Whereas in fact, Val should probably have gone to some other bit and it should have been sorted. So the fact that things are coming here is an indication perhaps that things are going wrong. I was thinking also it's good that Ms Hubbard and her group are looking at this, but we've been asking why, and you know, it's because she's really interested in this sort of Amaraki stuff that we're all here for. But are we going to go and, I don't know, descend on a first start group one morning and sort of say, have you ever thought of asking the question of the council, how do you get stuff done? Because if we don't do that, then how do we know that people know you can even do that sort of thing? Rather than it just being the people who are, you know, fascinated by this sort of work. And then I just, on a practical level, we could have a for information, not for massive discussion, item that is put on each full council agenda, which is a tracker item, which just said, this question came here and we said, this needs to happen. So this is what happened, so that we know that it has been followed up. And I don't know whether we need a tracker officer, but somebody who actually does that, indeed, for all the committees. And yes, it's a big exercise, if you like, but that's the way of having a public path, which will actually say these things were considered and this is what we're doing. And it might even be updated 3 months or 6 months ahead and say, and this has finally been completed. But it will tell people that it hasn't been lost. Those are some comments.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Laurie. It's, well, firstly, I just want to say, when we have charts in reports, can we have them patterned as well as coloured? Because when they're printed in black and white, it becomes a little bit of an issue. So, it has been a problem for, well, the whole time I've been elected, is how the public interacts with the council through questions. So this body of work is really positive, and it's really good to see how seriously it's been taken. Although I will say that a lot of what we've learned so far has just confirmed what we already knew. I wanted to say that when we often talk this phrase of hard to reach people, and I think the council's only just beginning to realise that we are the hard to reach people more often than not. And how people access us is a real problem, but also the system that we've had is, you know, particularly under the cabinet system, it was really quite a closed shop, and there's very little way for members of the public to access wider councillors in a formal environment, other than, you know, full council and cabinet meetings, yeah, but other than emailing or ringing up their ward councillor. And I think that's kind of, you know, it's hard to say it's the chicken and the egg, how that formed that kind of hard shell to the council. But I also think that it wasn't always unwelcome, and perhaps like citizen involvement wasn't always welcome. So under the new committee system, it has opened up a lot of things to the public, and so whereby under the cabinet system, if you asked a public question, you would only get an answer from that cabinet member, whereas now at least, well, certainly on the policy committees and the LAC that I sit on, all members can answer a question. We've answered public questions, haven't we, Minesh, on committees in the past, and Simon chairs our South LAC and allows members to answer questions, and that's really the first time that's happened. And so you can also get different points of views, and the other thing is also under the committee system. So it's not just the cabinet member it's not just the chair who has knowledge of an issue. So, you know, the chair of a committee might not be on your LAC, but the members of that committee are, and they do have some insight and some knowledge and can answer and can also, you know, give a different perspective potentially. So I'm kind of just making comments, but what I wanted to come to really a challenge is that collecting all this information is really good, and like I said, confirms a lot of what we knew, and it will kind of give us the affirmation to go on and try and make a difference and improve things. But those solutions are going to be quite difficult to find, and more difficult than getting the information in the first place, I would say. And so as we start to develop those solutions, there can't be an end point. You know, there has to be a learning by doing, because it's highly unlikely that it's going to be perfect, or even, you know, 9 out of 10. initially. So I just wondered how we can factor in some kind of constant review, for want of another phrase, really. Thank you.
I'll take the other points from the floor and I'll ask you, Laurie, if you want to come back in at the end as people are generally making comments rather than asking questions, if that's okay. Minesh.
Thanks, Chair, and yet another comment. Thank you, Laurie, for the report as well, and also really enjoyed the session that we had a couple of weeks ago. I mean, one of the things that came from that, which I think is reflected in this, and it touches on Shauna's point, is things going wrong and questions being asked when things go wrong. And actually, you know, there are a range of reasons why people ask questions. A lot of the transport questions I've seen asked at either full council or at transport meetings, I think are symptomatic of this shouldn't have been a question. This shows that we've done the process wrong in the first place. We haven't co-created policy. We haven't engaged with people early enough that they feel the question is the last resort option. And I think, you know, looking at this where people say they don't feel listened to, they don't have the power to influence change, 90% of people weren't satisfied with all their questions. That's not, you know, some people are always, decisions aren't going to work for everyone. People are going to disagree, but I'm sure a lot of that will be because people feel engaged too far down the pipeline. That should never have been a question. It should have been us working with people much earlier on. And some questions, I'm sure, were right to be questions, were meant to be questions. Others, I think we needed to deepen democracy at an earlier stage and actually bring people in. And the question is symptomatic of a wider problem.
Thanks. Mike.
Thanks, Chair. A number of comments on this. The first thing that struck me was the people that turned up to the workshop, a large number of them have not asked a question. In fact, perhaps the majority were there, have not asked a question before. And they didn't know how to ask a question or how to access asking a question, which was interesting. People who were on the table I was on, who had asked a question, had got themselves into the system and therefore knew how it worked and knew where to go. And I think, to me, that is the biggest barrier for people. How do I don't understand the system. We've moved from having a full council and councils out there into a plethora of options which people don't understand and therefore are put off. And perhaps the natural first point of entry is to contact the local councillor, because not only can they potentially deal with the issue that they've raised, but they're also there to signpost people in the right direction and make sure that they go, no matter what the question is, to the best place, whether it be the RAC or whether it be a policy committee. And I think it's getting those mechanisms so that people will get directions where they need to go, and the first natural point of call, from my perspective, is the local council, because they have the knowledge and they know where the best place to go is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Alison.
First, it is a comment again. The first thing's building a bit on what Shauna was saying. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see a breakdown of the demographics of who we've got responses from. When we did it for our LAC group, what really struck me was there was a massive hole around from about 25 to about 50. So basically working people or young people with families, like we had some stuff from young people because we'd really gone out and worked to get it, but we had nothing from working age people at all. And most of the people who came to the workshop, which I also really enjoyed, I would say were my age or older. And I think it's also very interesting that such a large proportion of people, even who were interested enough to respond, didn't know whether they could ask a question. Which I think, you know, with some of the things Councillor Otten was raising, I think that we are starting from an extremely low baseline of what people understand about how to participate. And that's not in any way derogatory to those people. I think it's really important that we work to lift that line. And I'm trying to think how to do that. And I wondered about how much we're talking to the youth voice and influence workers and whether we could do consultations or publicities with schools around citizenship sessions. I wondered how much we could change the form. I really like hybrid meetings, but also whether we could do anything. I mean, I'm not the right person really to decide, but things like podcast formats or oral formats rather than written formats that might be easier for people to access. I think we need to find a way of contacting, at least getting some feedback from the working age population, who often can't come to the events that we organise. Even Saturdays, you know, I'm doing a walking surgery on a Saturday once a month, and I saw people last night who would have loved to have come, but they work on a Saturday. And also how we can work with the VCF, just thinking about my ward. For instance, our local community hub has created a single entry system through the police website where people can come and register concerns about antisocial behaviour, for instance, and they can do it on the forums access. I wonder if we could get more local gatekeepers who are more in touch, who could help signpost, as well as, you know, what Councillor Lever was saying about the importance of local councillors as signposting. All of those things really.
Thank you. I think I've got a very quick point from John Ed, is that right?
Dead quick. It was just picking up again on something that Joe had said about where to take questions. Has it stopped?
Yeah, it's still.
Okay. At our LAC last night, somebody brought in a question about a park property in Richmond Park, and it was absolutely the right place to bring, in as much as it was a really local concern, and yet it probably should have gone to Parks Committee, because they're the people who actually can tell you why this building has been neglected and things. So I don't know whether the answer is to make sure that when we have questions about things like that, that an appropriate officer is also expected to come to the LAC, because the question has been asked in advance and therefore they can be there to answer it, or whether we say your question is going to go on a journey, to use that popular phrase, and it will go here, here and here in order to get answered, but each step of the way will tell you where it's got to, which I know sounds like we're creating a bureaucracy, but it could just be a very simple, you know, standard email. Your question has now got here and it's going to be discussed on this day and you'll get the response from that. Something that makes people know that wherever they ask their question, it will go to the right place and get proper consideration and also be monitored so that we know it's still happening. Goes back a bit to what I said about having a tracker item. But otherwise, it's about making sure everybody feels that wherever they ask their question, it's going to get sorted.
Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Bit of a comment first. I mean, in terms of my experience on the LACs, in terms of people asking questions, if somebody asks me a public question, you know, rule one is, if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. Which means, you know, obviously that's unsatisfactory. Quite often, you know, I'm very grateful to the other members on the LAC who may have, you know, certainly Councillor Auckland is always a whiz on transport, so we shall miss him. Because that's one of the areas that he's always asked. So I always have somebody out go, and you know, get something that would be a reasonable answer. So yeah, so that's I guess my view on that. One kind of question I do have, when we looked as LAC chairs at doing hybrid meetings, and I know there was one in the southwest. Has any of that fed back into this process? Because I know as chairs we were looking at rolling that out. That did seem to die a death. I don't quite know what happened there, and if there's anything learning, or if we could move that on in any way, perhaps. I don't know. Thank you.
Thanks. If I can make a couple of quick reflections, and then I'll ask you to come back, Laurie, and then we'll move on to what the next steps are and hopefully agree those. I think I do agree with just about all the points that have been raised by councillors. One of the things that I think does come out strongly in the survey and at the workshop was the high level of dissatisfaction with the answers that people received. I think there's a range of reasons for that. Some of it is that it may have been an adequate answer, but people don't like the answer. Some of it may be that we didn't properly answer the question that people raised. Some of it is about the process and the amount of time that we have to give answers. But I think one of my other reflections is that often what people are looking for is not so much the answer to a question, but a conversation about a particular issue. We might not be able to facilitate that through the public question sessions, but one of the things we do need to look at is how we can have more of those conversations with our citizens, which may well be through local area committees and other forms of democratic engagement. I think that question goes a bit beyond this particular task and finish group, but it is something that we are looking at as part of our work plan that we will come on to later in this committee. I will leave it there. Laurie, do you want to reflect back on any of the points that have been raised, and then we will just go through the proposed next steps for the task and finish group and agree those?
Thank you, Chair. That's all been really useful, and I think the conversation there was, I made quite detailed notes really, because I think all those issues are all exactly right. I strongly agree with everything that's been said really. It feels like we need to move to that, we need to listen to what Ruth Hubbard's sort of activity, the report from that, and to what they're saying as well, but chances are, I think, as Paul kind of alluded to, it'll probably add to the sort of evidence base around the challenges we know exist now, I think. There's four probably big buckets of issues we need to look at. One is that there's something significant around public awareness, and that is about empowering people to know where they can talk to members and actually ask. It might not be asking a question, it might be raising it in a different environment, it might be discussion, but we need to. Some of that will be about public questions, some of it will be about that wider public engagement activity. There's definitely something about a systemic issue which Councillor Rich has alluded to, about how do we ensure that there's a visibility of what's happened to a question, even if it takes 4 months to find a resolution, because it might be a complex complaint issue. We still need to make sure that's available and visible to any citizen, not just the person who asked it. So there's something about management of the data that we get from a citizen, and therefore how we use that and make it open and transparent online and in other settings like this as well. The third sort of bucket is like the bit around how a question is aired and how that experience feels. So that's everything from the tech, from the format, from whether it's in a committee meeting, whether it's a sort of a Q&A session, whether it's a more discursive sort of environment with members, but we need to think about answers and solutions in that sort of space, because those barriers are everything from the time of meetings to whether it's the right setting to actually whether it's actually qualities barrier that stops somebody feeling they can have their voice, which is a significant problem. And then the last bucket is really around that quality issue and about behaviours and how we make sure that everybody's experience, yourselves included in that, is safe, but also you feel safe to be able to be honest and open and discuss that with a citizen in a good setting, really. So I think we need to think about maybe that structure for a solutions workshop, pending the wider bit of information we need to get into that. But I think that's just been a really valuable conversation.
Thank you. If I can just go back to the next steps that were proposed for the task and finish group, then the task and finish group now meet quite soon to go through some proposals based on the findings of this work, and then look to test and iterate some of the solutions with staff and also with citizens, and draw up a draft report of recommendations for the governance committee. Is everyone happy with those next steps? Yep, I'm seeing nods all around. We will aim to bring those to the next governance committee. I think that process of iteration, we can't be absolutely certain that we can wrap everything up in time for the November meeting, but I think that will definitely be our aim. We'd like to get this work finished and improved, though I do also agree with the comments about, it will be an ongoing testing and making sure we are getting this right. So for the recommendations that the committee consider and discuss the insight from citizens on public questions and petitions, discuss and agree next steps to develop proposals which will improve our approach to public questions. I think we're all happy with those. Yep. And we can move on to the next item. Thank you everybody, and thank you Laurie and all the officers who were involved in this work. So our next item 8 is on the NHS governance proposal. So we have Joe Horrobin here, who, if you could introduce yourself, Joe, and this item on the agenda. Thank you.
No, that's better. Good morning. Hi, I'm Jo Horrobin, Director of Integrated Commissioning, Sheffield City Council. The paper I'm bringing today sets out a recommendation for the Governance Committee to sponsor a task and finish group to consider appropriate Sheffield City Council membership of the forum that considers joint council and NHS commissioning and planning. The background to this is quite long and complex, but I will try and make it as succinct as possible, and the paper has tried to do so as well. But if there are more questions, I'm really happy, to respond to those. But the council has a really strong approach to collaboration and a really strong track record of working with the NHS, especially since the Better Care Fund was launched in 2013. That actually enabled us to establish within the city a single pooled budget, and in fact we went to pretty much the whole hog and have one of the largest pooled budgets in the country, with the most recent funding level being around 750 million of activity across services for adults and children and young people across health and care, and strong elements of prevention as well, and demand reduction. So the governance arrangements to support that evolved over time, and in 2019 a joint commissioning committee was established formally as part of the council's constitution at that time. It didn't have delegated powers, but it was established as a committee with a view to it having the potential to have delegated powers in the future. We never got to that point because the wider context has changed and evolved and overtaken us, if you like. But that was the publicly accountable space for cabinet members at that time, and for the governing body members of the clinical commissioning group, where we came together to make joint planning and commissioning work, and then returned to our respective organisations in order to seek the appropriate approvals. With the changes, however, to the council's own governance following the referendum in 2021, and also the changes to NHS governance as a result of the Health and Care Act 2022, that joint commissioning committee is no longer an appropriate structure for the work, very simply, and it has been removed, therefore, from the council's constitution. Health no longer has a governing body in the sense that it did, and the committee system, it feels that we need to review the way in which we are taking part in strategic planning and commissioning with the NHS. So the partnership working with the NHS is no less important than it ever has been. In fact, I'd say it was more critical than ever, with really significant interdependencies across the system and for the citizens of Sheffield. So we need to consider the right governance arrangements to maintain good working and joint working and collaboration, whilst also respecting the principles behind the shift to the committee system. So the the recommendation in this paper is that the Governance Committee sponsors a task and finish group to consider, two key purposes really, to develop a proposal for governance arrangements that support joint planning and commissioning with NHS Sheffield, to be considered at a future Governance Committee meeting. We're suggesting the 28th of February to allow time for any discussion and changes that arise then to be incorporated ahead of the Council's annual general meeting. And as part of that proposal, we need to make sure that the Task and Finish group would consider how to link into the existing NHS governance and arrangements which are now in place in the city in response to the Health and Care Act. The benefits of partnership working and building those ongoing relationships and how we want to influence and collaborate. The respective roles of elected members and officers, because that has changed within the NHS as well, so it's important to consider that. And also, what working arrangements are needed, if you like, behind the scenes to ensure that everything works and links across from NHS governance through to our policy committees, so that we have appropriate and as smooth as possible decision making as a whole system. I'll leave it at that, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jo. Mike?
Thanks, Jo. Maybe I'm missing something, but would this not be a natural fit as a subcommittee of the Adult Health and Social Care Policy Committee?
I think one of the challenges is that the remit is broader than adult health and social care, so it is also to include children, and there was a real emphasis on that through an amendment made as the Act went through Parliament, the Health and Care Act. So it is really important that it's more cross-cutting, and actually significant work is also happening under the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee with things like family hubs and Start in Life. So there are a number of, and Team Round the Person as well. So it does feel that there is a need for a more cross-cutting input perhaps than a subcommittee from the Adult Health and Social Care Committee. And as I mentioned, it is important that we think about the role of officers as well in this space. So it's something that we can consider. I think probably that's something that the Task and Finish group would be able to unpick and challenge and test.
Can I just come back, because any subcommittee doesn't have to be dedicated to the adult health and social care. It can take people from other committees to form it. So constitutionally, I would have thought, and David will probably guide on this one, I think constitutionally, I think that would be a fit, but I don't know. Thank you.
Constitutionally, that's right. Full council would set up the terms of reference that a subcommittee could have, and could also determine what its composition would be.
I think just to clarify, what we are proposing here is to set up a task and finish group to look at those governance arrangements, so that how that finally looks, but it will be up to full council to appoint members to these governance arrangements, which will be a joint committee, the cross-commissioning committee with the NHS and other partners involved in that. Does that clarify? Yeah. Paul?
Thanks. I'm not sure if I need to speak. I was just going to try and say for clarity for Mike, it's really working out how the council interacts with these NHS committees, and whilst maintaining some political balance and making sure that the majority of the policy committees will be impacted by the decisions made in these boards, but the decisions can't be made by members on these boards because they don't have the authority as under the committee system. So then they will have to go back to the appropriate committees to then make the decision on behalf of the council. So that's the it's a complicated interaction, and that's why it's at the governance committee rather than a policy committee.
And that probably adds to that, I think, a key role for members who end up on this committee will be to bring the voices of communities into these services and ensure that with those partners we're commissioning services that really work for people in our communities. So I think there's a real significant role for members in that goes beyond particular committee remits. Sorry, I saw another hand. Was it Minesh?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I guess a general question about the draft terms of references. I wonder if there is something to formally embed in about bringing in some of the priorities of the council in terms of localising spend, localising supply, and having that formally recognised as a priority for this work. Obviously, maybe that's cart before the horse in terms of this is about the task of industry to look at that, but yeah.
Listen.
I was thinking similar with environmental considerations, sustainability of the work.
Do you want to respond to those, Jo?
Yes, happy to. Yeah, absolutely. I think the point about planning and commissioning strategic planning at place and actually at locality and neighbourhood level is really important. And you know, I'm very happy that the terms of reference are adjusted to reflect a focus on that because I think there is, you know, we know that there is significant pressure in the NHS. We know that NHS England are increasingly, you know, setting the agenda for integrated care systems, and I think that's why the role of members really in the system in Sheffield is something that the system recognises as providing some weight at place and in localities. So very happy for us to include something specific into the terms of reference. That would be something that we look at, and equally on you know, environment and ensuring that you know, due attention is paid to that in light of our climate emergency commitments. Yeah.
Thanks. I think if we're going to alter the terms of reference, we need to be precise about that now, don't we? So perhaps could we add under the outline timetable of activity under point 2, could we add there in the paragraph about the relevance of political balance, the importance of community consultation involvement, something around the importance of locality and the environment? Is that sufficient, David? Are you happy with that? It's,
Sorry, can we, rather than using the word environment, can we use does it necessarily mean the point that Alison was making there? Yeah, climate and nature emergency.
I'm happy with that, as other members are. Are members happy with that?
Sorry, Chair, can we just be clear exactly where we're putting these words? Because I thought point 3 was the terms of reference. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong place.
I'm looking in the draft terms of reference in the outline table of activity, which is on page 43 of the papers at the bottom in point 2 there, that we add after the importance of community consultation involvement, we also add the importance of locality and the climate and nature emergency. Would people be happy? And then go on to, and the importance of ongoing relationships to partnership working.
I'm completely baffled. Sorry, Chair, to jump in. I'm completely baffled by this. This is a task and finish group we're proposing to set up. Are you asking each group, you know, I guess through its whips, to ensure that the people put on this committee have a sufficient understanding of the climate and nature emergency in order to consider the makeup of a committee to deal with it, with the relationship between the council and the NHS? I mean, I'm slightly baffled what the ask is here.
I think we're proposing that the terms of reference ask members to consider the importance of place and climate when making decisions. I'm not sure that's that complicated. It's not about having expertise on this particularly. I'll take Sue just to clarify the question.
I still don't understand this. So the purpose of this task and finish group is to agree a process by which this council appoints people to this other committee, which is to have a governance role in our relationship with the NHS. I'm not entirely sure how and in what way we can take into account the wider impact of that appointment on the environment or a nature emergency, because I don't understand how who we appoint to a governance committee affects the nature emergency.
Chair, can I come back on that? Thank you. I mean, so one thing I was proposing that we could add it to the purpose instead, because it considers it within the remit of the committee. I would say the NHS is one of the largest spenders in the local economy. It's one of the largest landowners in the local economy. It's really important to consider in commissioning, as well as in our interacting with the NHS, how land is used, how the environment is used, how that is prioritised in those contracts. What I was suggesting initially was just that in the framework of this task and finish group, it has to consider localising spend, it has to consider environmental sustainability in setting up a new committee. That's not saying the members have to, well, you would hope members have an awareness of the climate nature emergency anyway, but I think we have to be quite clear that that committee has to have that in its terms of referencing.
My understanding, and I'm obviously if the officers say differently, I'm more than happy to agree, but my understanding is that we are not able to, the role of this working group isn't to establish the terms of reference of the governance committee, this joint governance committee. It is only to work out how we appoint people to that committee. I would absolutely agree that when that committee is involved, when that committee is making decisions, yes, of course, it should have that information in mind and take into account when it's making its decisions. So are we suggesting that as part of this task and finish group, we're also looking to influence the terms of reference of the joint committee? Because I would have thought that had to be done with the joint committee.
I think you're right that we're establishing the way that we will appoint to this committee, but I think it's also right that we consider why we are appointing people to that committee within that, because that will be part of the understanding that we need to reach as for how we select people to join the committee. But I do worry that we're getting ourselves a little bit tangled in knots, really, over a fairly minor point. So,
I think, and I'll let Joe correct me if I'm wrong, that this isn't just about how do we appoint people to the committee, it's about what's the role of the committee within the overarching structure with the NHS and the governance. So I think it is it's not just how are we going to appoint people, it's what is that committee doing once we've appointed people to it, and how does that fit in with our own governance?
and I think that's referred to when it talks about the respective roles of elected members and officers, is to bring various factors from the council into this committee. So I think there is some relevance there, but I don't think we should get ourselves tied up in knots over it either. So I'm going to let Joe come back first of all and then clarify that.
Thank you. And just without wanting to make this any more complicated, it isn't necessarily a committee that is the answer to the question here. It is how does the council want to engage with the NHS governance in the city in order to play our best part and to ensure that the links and dependencies with the relevant policy committees are rightly made and our duties discharged in that respect. So this isn't necessarily about setting up another committee or subcommittee. That might be the conclusion that is reached, but it doesn't. That isn't prescribed or essential. that's part of the consideration.
What I'm going to suggest is that we don't amend these terms of reference, but I think we've had a useful discussion that will then feed into the task and finish group. And I know that some of the points that I think lots of us have raised points who were proposing to be members of that task and finish group anyway. So I think we can bring those points into the task and finish group, and I don't feel we have to make amendments to it here. Go on.
I don't see why we can't amend it, to be honest. It was forwarded and second and thirded, and we have a committee and we can have a vote, and I don't think that we should bow away from what is essentially climate change denial and by not amending it.
I think that is a complete mischaracterisation of what has happened, Paul, and a very unfair comment.
If I may, I would support your recommendation to take the recommendations unamended. I think we could all chime in now with long speeches about how much we care about the climate change emergency. We could put in an amendment to say let's include the cost of living crisis in the remit of this as well, because all these things affect each other, don't they? But given that this is a process question, I think you're absolutely right just to say let's just agree. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and check whether people would agree. And I mean, I'd agree there may be other factors that we have not yet considered that we may want to bring into this. And really, this is the task and finish group is about exploring these questions in more detail, and not for us to get into the detail here. Alison, I'll take your point.
I completely understand what you just said, but from what Joe was saying, you were talking about a broader process than simply establishing a committee or whatever. And the reason I brought up the climate emergency is because I was thinking about Greg Fell as Director of Public Health, and the biggest, if you follow what Greg produces, the biggest set of challenges to public health that are coming out are generated from the climate emergency, and that our responses to that in the medium term as well as the long term. So that was why I was suggesting it was included.
Okay, are people happy to proceed with the terms of reference as they are, but taking into account all the points that people have raised in this discussion? Can I see nods to that? I can see it in favour over here. Are people happy with that approach? Can I see if people are happy for us to take the proposal as stands? Yep. Okay, thank you. So, just to go through the recommendations then. To consider and agree the proposed scope and terms of reference of the task and finish group to review governance arrangements to support partnership working with NHS Sheffield. I think we have just agreed that. To agree elected member representation for that task and finish group from across the 3 political groups. I believe all groups have put some names forward for this task and finish group. So they are yourself, Sue, and...
So from the Liberal Democrats, there'll be myself and Councillor Pennybaker.
From Labour, it will be myself and Councillor Ruth Milsom and Paul.
Myself and Angela Argentio.
Thank you. And to agree to receive a proposal for consideration from this task and finish group at their meeting on the 28th of February 2024. Can I see that everyone's happy with those recommendations, please? Thank you, Joe, for bringing the paper. We look forward to getting that work started and taking all those views into account. We will move on to item 9, which is a verbal update on the Member Development Working Group. Jason.
Thank you, Chair. This is to provide a brief update on the first meeting of the Member Development Working Group. That was held on the 13th of September. And if members recall, that was re-established by the Governance Committee in July. So we've had one meeting so far. Thank you to the members that came to that very productive meeting. It helped us really sort of think about our approach to member development and start looking at some of the issues. I'll just go through some of the outcomes of the first meeting, if that's okay. Terms of reference, we looked at the terms of reference that the Governance Committee had agreed back in July just to make sure they were fit for purpose. We had a discussion earlier in the same week at the corporate members group about where we might consider issues of well-being, welfare and safety for members, and in particular the Debate Not Hate campaign of the LGA. So issues relating to that was something we thought we could incorporate into the terms of reference for the working group. Just briefly, the LGA campaign aims to raise awareness of the role of councillors in their communities and encourage healthy debate and improve the response and support for local politicians who do face face abuse and intimidation. So we'll be bringing some of that work to the working group, including practical advice for councillors who might face abuse, online abuse, issues of personal safety and well-being and resilience. So that was something that we incorporated into the terms of reference. The second point was around the skills survey. We wanted to get a baseline really of where members were at and where people felt their learning was at and their skills. So a skills survey is currently being developed. It'll be shared with the member working group for their input at the next meeting. And the survey will then be sent out to councillors, and the aim is for us to gain some insight into the training and development the members would benefit from, and how we best deliver that, and in what kind of format we might think about developing that, take into account people's working patterns and the like. We also wanted to identify existing skills and talents which councillors might have, and whether there's any extent to which we could have member champions for particular parts of aspects of knowledge and skills that they might be bringing in to the council, because we're obviously aware that members come with a lot of skills and knowledge when they join the council. The next point was around role profiles. So we've produced draft role profiles for councillor roles, and that's starting with the role of the city councillor, then the role of policy chairs, policy committee chairs, deputy chairs of policy committees, and group spokespersons. So they're in draft. Members of the group have commented on those. We will take them back to the next meeting of the working group, and then they will come here to the governance committee as a sort of final cut of those for consideration. Then we did a brief review of the current programme of learning and development, and one of the main issues we felt we needed to look at was induction for the new members. We'd certainly load a lot of information on new members when they join us, and we think that the group felt it was time to look at that and consider how that's done, whether it's done differently, whether we look at the volume of information that we give to members, the content overall and the format of those sessions. So that's certainly one big piece of work coming from that. There is forthcoming learning which we looked at, and there is a session on risk management which is for audits and standards members which is coming up, but all members are welcome to that. So we talked about learning that we felt was essential, and learning that we felt it was appropriate to invite other members, and sort of we use the category welcome new members attending those, just so they can extend their knowledge and understanding. So there is that session coming up on the 17th of this month. Finally, we looked at how members can access other types of learning, so more self-directed learning, which is not formal. So one example was the Book Boon facility, which is open to council officers at the moment, and it's bite-sized learning, podcasts, e-books and the like, virtual classrooms for personal and professional development. It's fully accessible to members and officers through mobile device or laptop, and we're just currently setting members up so they've got access to that, and then we'll promote that with members. And it really is self-directed learning. It's not formal and it's not recorded. I think there's over 3,000 pieces of learning in there that people can access individually. The next working group is on the 25th of October, and we've decided to meet approximately every 6 months so we can carry on with a programme of work which we're developing a forward plan really, so we can prioritise what the groups do. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's meeting every 6 weeks rather than every 6
Did I say
months.
6 months?
Yeah.
Yes, 6 months, sorry, Chair.
Okay. We will make slightly quicker progress in that. Thank you very much, Jason, and for the work of officers on this. Is there any comments or questions around this? Alison.
Hello. I seem to be, I'll try and be quick. Just as a fairly new member now, one of my second biggest challenge after trying to get access, to be able to participate properly around my working arrangements, is training, accessing training. And I really appreciate the work you're doing in the long run. What would be smashing in the short run is even just a list of what's available internally to go out, so that I could look at it and see if I can access any of it. I'm on my 4th email to try and get some in-house training around finance. I have booked onto some LGA, but it really is a tortuous process. You have to be pretty determined, and obviously we don't want it to be like that on top of everything else that people have to do. The other thing I would say is process. I think we're all navigating how to work the committee system, and any thoughts and training around that, especially anything from councils like Glasgow that have used it for longer, would be appreciated. And I missed, because something else came up, what you said about where to access that bite-sized stuff. So if that could be on the list of things to access and how you access, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. I think we're just working through how members can access the book boon, aren't we? So that will be sent out to all councillors as well. And I do encourage people as well to use the LGA website in order to find there's some really useful training that can be done again quite flexibly on their website as well. Did you want to respond there?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the questions. Although we do promote some learning elements, I think I could take your point that we need the whole picture, perhaps communicating to members better, so you know what's coming up and what else is available that might not be a formal learning session or training session, and including LGA related learning and development as well, or just whether it might just be information and briefings that are sat there and might be useful to use as well. In terms of the process and the operating within the committee system, I think that's a really good point, and we've talked within, and we'll talk later on in this meeting and in the implementation plan about making sure officers are sort of comfortable and confident in that. And I think perhaps it's something we need to include for members as well. We do some of that in the induction. It's whether we actually widen that out as well and make those resources available so people can access those. Thanks.
Thank you. I've not seen any other hands up, and this report is to note. So duly noted, and we will move on unless there's any final questions. No. I will just remind those of you who are members of the committee to feedback on those role profiles ahead of our next meeting so that we can move that item on as well. Thank you. So our next item is the update on the GRIP. If Laurie would like to take us through that.
Very briefly, Chair, this is your regular insight into the GRIP, which we're following up from the last meeting. As you know, we bring the Excel sheet, which kind of covers off everything that's happening to respond to the more technocratic and officer elements of the governance review we undertook last year. What I've done for this meeting, and it's in response to member suggestions at the last governance committee, is just to provide a quick note which gives you a bit more of a tangible narrative of the things we've done and the things we've still got to do, which is the top paper, and obviously all the detail is in the appendices in the Excel sheet. I'm not proposing to go through that in lots of detail, but what I will probably just focus on briefly are the things that we need to still do. Whilst it's not very publicly consumable, this stuff, I think I'll be fairly frank about that. A lot of it is about system improvement and helping officers, members, and actually to a degree members of the public navigate this, but really it's about getting our officers the right sort of guidance, building on Councillor Norris's comment just a moment ago about how do you navigate the system. Some of it is complicated and we are still learning, so we just need to get the right tools and information guidance in the right places for everybody to be able to use, certainly internally anyway. So in the first section, it's structured based on the structure of the Excel sheet, which links back to the governance review. But really, just to flag things we need to do. In the first bit about improving how we explain the system, I think we've talked a little bit about this today in the public questions area, about how people navigate and how we help people find the right spaces to ask questions and engage in the system. Still, that's work ongoing, as you know. There's definitely something about a continuous improvement in how we help people to access this building and use it in a more as a democratic setting, but also that could involve hybrid, could involve technology, but it also means removing any barriers for people with any physical disabilities from getting into the building as well. There's a whole section around how we provide officer support and guidance. At the minute, it's not really housed in any one setting, and one thing that Jason's team have been working hard on is creating a single portal for all the report templates. I know this is kind of a little boring, but it's really important, so it stops officers repeatedly asking Jason's team for information and understanding. We want to try and provide the right guidance, the right support, the right templates, so there's a one-stop shop for any officer who needs to find what they need to find to get you a committee report in the right or content to the right meeting at the right time. One of the things, the reason that's important is obviously to get you the best sort of reports you need to help members make good decisions, but it also responds to the issue that was really flagged last year about timeliness of reports, that things don't get clogged in the system, so that David's colleagues in legal or colleagues in finance get reports so they can cover off the implications and the issues of that as that paper's being developed. And we're still seeing that improve. It's not quite there, and so we know there are things we still need to do. Just moving on to the bottom of that section as well. So the section that's headed improving the support that we provide to those working in the system. Jason just alluded to it, but there's a specific piece of training here we do need to do, and we're probably going to have to get some external support on this around improving the consistency and quality of report writing. I think I probably might open a can of worms here, but I think we're seeing improvement. So the inclusion of EIAs and climate impact assessments is getting better, and we've got data to evidence that. But the quality of how reports are written, how succinct they are, whether they help members get to the recommendations quickly, and they explain quite explicitly what options you're being presented with, we need to improve that, and there's a piece of work we need to do to get that consistent across the council. In the section below around developing the governance based on the 6-month review, one of the pieces of work that we'll come on to in the work plan is around the committee remits, which we talked about last year. And there's an association with that about the relationship between local area committees as well, and which is something we need to work on alongside the public participation piece. And all that is detailed in quite a lot of content in the Excel sheet. Your version is black and white. If you look at the version online, you'll see that there's quite a lot of green in the RAG rating in the boxes there. So we are making progress. Where there are ambers, there are things there which are all collected around one or two actual issues and actions, and some elements are connected to the work plan as well. So I'll stop there and ask the Chair to open for questions if there are any comments and ideas. Thanks.
Thank you. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. One was that on Audit Committee, we actually wrote what we expect in our reports technical word thing, guidance, that's a better word, for officers, because we were concerned that reports we were getting didn't fit what we as an audit committee thought we should get. So that might be something to look at. It does get appended to the back of each committee agenda. And two, something I think we could really do with is actually presentation skills for officers, because we get it's particularly you, obviously, Laurie, because we do get people who just read their report to us when in fact we can all read the reports we've been given, and also actually engaging and learning how to speak to us is a very useful skill, and it's something that should be done, if you like, lower down the ranks so that people are prepared and ready for when they do come to present to committee. just small things, like how you knowing how to use the mic and things. Okay?
Thank you, Councillor Richards, for the review of the earlier presentation, but I think you're right. I think the audit report, that'd be really helpful if I can ask David, I'm sure all colleagues to share it, but we could use that as a sort of template to help some of that work along. There are some things that I think there's some learning and development as well as guidance on just how you do it well, I think, or to a consistent standard. So there's something about that. Presentation skills is a really good idea. One of the things we found from the 6-month review was I think there are more officers than probably ever before involved in coming to committees of various guises because there are multiple decision-making spaces now. And therefore you get a bigger group of officers that are exposed to that scenario, and we shouldn't make any assumptions about people's skills and learning and development capabilities to present in these spaces either. So take that on board, that's really good. We can add it to this. So thank you.
Sorry, can I just throw in very quickly also something about learning to work with members? Because that just always seems to come as a bit of a shock that people are working in a political small p environment.
Thanks, Minesh.
Thanks, Laurie. A very minor thing, but also to add, I think I said it last time, but really like this format, it's really easy to see and really great to see what updates have come through. A very minor point, which isn't related, but is, we still don't have access to the internet. That still doesn't work for me, and when I've raised it, I've been told that IT know it's an issue, but they can't fix it. Alison said she was told that she's not meant to have access to it.
Yeah.
So it's great to see lots of things going on, but we don't have it.
My understanding is that members don't have access to the intranet, and that's a conscious thing. We've got access to the extranet rather than the staff intranet.
Thank you for raising it, Councillor Parrick. We'll take that away and have a look at that. I'm not quite clear, if I'm honest, about the reasoning for that. There may be a good reason, but I don't know what it is. So if we can at least get members an answer as to whether that's something that could be permitted or the reason for it, if not, we'll do that.
That would be helpful, because I guess just the point as well, so when I was first elected, we did have access to it, and there was a tab on my homepage for a quick link to the internet, and it was taken away around the start of this municipal year. So I don't know if that was a deliberate change or...
Okay, we'll look into that and bring a response to that to a future meeting, if we can make a note. I'm not seeing any more hands about this item. Sorry, Alison.
SharePoint as well. SharePoint's extremely unreliable, so you get told that you've got access to documents on SharePoint, and the links sometimes work and sometimes don't. So if you can't get on the internet either, if your SharePoint link doesn't work, then there's another series of emails trying to get your SharePoint link working.
Okay, any more questions on this? Anything else you need to respond to there, Laurie? I think we can just take those away. Okay, thank you, everybody. And then we're back to Laurie again for item 11, which is the work plan.
Thank you, Chair. Again, relatively briefly, I think. Members will see in the report I've drafted some notes just on page 56 just to update the committee on what we've done following the conversation here last time. So the main addition to the work plan item is I've tried to put dates against the forthcoming items because before there was a lot of TBC. And what I've also tried to do is offer some officer perspective on what that item might entail. And I think if you recall, we had a conversation here that a single line on that work plan could look like a paper that comes here and we agree it and that's it. As we see with the public questions workshop, we'll see with the public participation, democratic engagement bit, we'll see with the remits. These entail member and officer time and citizen time in most cases as well, and need multiple months to try and get through because obviously there's capacity limits on everybody's time, including citizens. So what I've tried to offer here is a bit of a steer as to what I think we can get through. And I put and left the TBCs towards the bottom of the work plan. There is just that practical reality of what we can deliver within a municipal year, particularly if we want to get into a depth and a quality of work, a bit like the public questions piece, which does take time. It takes time to enable citizens to get involved. It takes time for members to understand and engage in some of that evidence base and participate in some of that as well. So, as you see, if we move just slightly down the work plan, we've just picked up in this meeting the NHS piece of work. The suggestion is at the next meeting we particularly focus on democratic participation. And I think if bringing back the public questions item will fit neatly with that as well. So I think it's an element, it's an element of that area of activity. And then suggesting that we try and start looking at the remits and the association with LACs after Christmas. But again, most of those will involve either a task and finish group or some discursive formats where we can start talking to members more broadly, to officers and to citizens about how that's all working really. And then I've put the other elements, including urgent decisions and looking at the health of the committee system. We might have to either push that towards the end of the year or maybe ask that to roll into the next year, just being realistic about the time we've got. But I'm open to telling suggestions from members whether they feel that's prioritised in the right way, and if it's not, we can have another look.
If I can add a couple of points in there, I do think it's a really full work plan, as we have certainly noted at pre-meetings, and I do think some of the areas on there, there's some overlap between them, and also with pieces of work going on in other committees and other pieces of work, particularly around democratic participation, local area committees, and so on. And I think we've also had a bit of a challenge, rightly, that we should be looking at how to have citizen involvement and citizen leadership around some of these areas as well. So I think you're right to put those into the next year. I think we probably need to think about how we draw those pieces of work together and think about how we look at those across the council, given their cross-cutting nature, and bring some proposals forward on that. I have seen Sinead, so...
On page 59, Charity Subcommittee and SCC role as a charitable trustee, it says likely to need task and finish group. I think you're likely right. But if we say March 24, is that when we want it to report? In which case we would want it to start work earlier. And also, if that is likely to recommend any changes, those would need to go to the May annual meeting. So I think we need to go backwards in terms of how it would work. So you've got some timings.
David, you respond.
Yes, John, yeah, I think we are looking at May for any changes that might come out of that task and finish group. I think there's some initial work we need to do to be able to bring it before Governance Committee's task and finish group. So I think March, I need to check against the, when we've actually got meetings. I think if we can get the task and finish group looking at it in March, stroke 8, reporting back here before we then get to May.
I get that. It's just that we go into PERP, we go into all sorts of things, and if we want to have a clear run at it, I'm just suggesting it might need to start a wee bit earlier, that's all. Or that we have some dates for a task and finish group sooner.
Laurie?
Thank you, Chair. One of the things I could suggest is that it certainly came up as, this might come up as part of the remits piece of work as well, so we might want to kick-start it as part of that and ask it to sort of have a task and finish group that's a slightly separate piece of work, recognising there's some complexity around that. We could either do that, or we could try and bring the sort of the terms of reference piece to like the February Governance Committee, and then at least we've got it kicked off, so you've got a couple of months running before you get to the May meeting.
Sue?
Mine's a very similar type of point, I'm afraid. I'm just looking at this piece of work on the devolution to LACs and review of committee remits. That's obviously going to be quite a big piece of work, and I know we actually discussed it informally at workshops last year. I think, given that our January meeting is not till well into the middle of January, that effectively means we wouldn't be able to start work until right at the end of January. So I'm just wondering if we could bring it, the actual setting up of the working group to before Christmas, so they can start work early in January rather than having to wait. I just think if we can get these committees sort of agreed, these working groups agreed, they can then start work quite quickly without having to, you know, we could lose a few weeks if we don't.
I think one of my reflections on that would be that we might want to look at an overarching task and finish group, if you like, that is drawn from other committees as well, because this does have relevance across committees that then has strands of work. And maybe what we should look to do is to bring some proposals to the next governance committee for the work plan item that spells that out a bit more clearly, rather than try and shuffle lots of things forward at this stage and then find that we don't have time to do them, if that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm absolutely keen to involve a reasonably wide number of people in that group. But I just think we will, if we can actually agree who those people are before the end of the year, we can start work early in January rather than pushing it. So we end up rushing everything, and that, you never do good things well if you're rushing, and we'll end up rushing everything in May and March. May and March? February and March.
I think we probably need to bring some more detailed proposals about some of the things on the work plan to the next governance committee meeting, but then make sure that we do have a plan for the rest of the year that will reflect those points. Yep. Paul.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with the points made by Sue and Sinead, and they are important things, and there are, you know, they're all important things on here, and it does feel like some of them need to be dealt with sooner, but you know, we've already got 2 task and finish groups live, and if we're not careful, we'll basically be working full time on governance task and finish groups. So certainly you and I will, assuming we will be all representing, you know, on the majority of them, and so it might be nice to see this laid out in a Gantt chart, so that we can have a, you know, visually see what this workload is going to look like, because it's not just members, because of course, you know, there are 84 councillors, but it's also the workload of the officers and Laurie and his team who are going to have to make it happen.
Absolutely, we have to consider all the resource for these pieces of work. Minesh.
Thanks, Chair. Just to comment on, obviously, we've got the devolution to lax with a date. That may change. Establishing a subcommittee of TRC or considering whether TRC should hold TROs doesn't have a date, and they do feel like similar pieces of work. I wonder if we do want the devolution to lax working group to also consider whether lax should have TROs, because otherwise we might be doing one piece of work and then another one in a few years, judging from the amount of work we have, which might then add more things to lax anyway. They just seem quite related.
And I think that item is also really related to committee remits, actually, which might be a way of pulling those items together, would be a way of, again, reducing. We don't need to, some of these may not end up as all single line items, I think, but part of, but we'll do a little more work on this, I think, to bring to the next governance committee, taking all those points on board. Any other questions from members, or Laurie, did you want to respond to any of those?
Just to say thank you. I think all those comments are really helpful. I think we're wrestling with a committee full of members who are on other committees. You've all got big responsibilities as well, and officers who are supporters of the committees as well. But this is quite, we have almost like a monthly schedule of meetings here. We have more meetings than most of the policy committees. So it is just being realistic about it and prioritising the things we really think we can make a difference to improve how we operate and how our committee system operates. There's some really good pieces of work on here that are much needed. So even if we have to have a session where we work through what we're definitely going to prioritise, that would be helpful. And I think we've sort of just done that, but I think having that little bit of extra narrative and description of what that project might look like with a Gantt chart, which is always good. I think we should do that for the next meeting and then be really clear to citizens about what we're going to get through before May. I will do that.
Okay, thank you everyone. I'm not seeing any more hands up on that. So that leaves us with just item 12, which is the date of the next meeting, which is on the 22nd of November 2023. So thank you everybody for coming and for your contributions.